Two black sisters bought an abandoned storage unit for $400, but what they found inside rewrote Arizona's history. If you love stories about courage, mystery, and justice, watch till the end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The Arizona sun rose over Phoenix like a slow-burning flame, spilling gold across the cracked sidewalks and rusted rooftops of the city's forgotten streets. Naomi Carter adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag and glanced at her twin sister, Layla, who stood beside her, clutching a manila envelope with trembling hands. Inside was everything they had left in the world, $473. It wasn't much. It wasn't even enough to cover 1 month of their mother's medical bills, but this morning, it was all they needed to gamble on hope. The East Valley storage facility stretched before them like a graveyard of abandoned dreams, rows of metal doors, faded numbers, and the faint scent of dust baking in the sun. Pickup trucks idled nearby, their owners, mostly white men in trucker hats and mirrored sunglasses, chatting loudly as if they already knew they'd walk away richer. Naomi and Layla, both in second-hand jeans and scuffed sneakers, looked out of place among them. "Don't let them see you doubt," Naomi whispered, pushing her curls behind her ear. Layla smirked. "You're talking to me about doubt? You're the one clutching that bag like it's your last lifeline." "It is," Naomi replied quietly. The auctioneer, a man with sunburned skin and the gravelly voice of too many cigarettes, stood atop a wooden crate and raised his megaphone. "All right, folks, Unit 47 up next. Abandoned, unpaid for 6 months. Looks like a heap of junk to me, but who knows? Let's start the bidding at 200. The crowd murmured. The metal door rattled open, revealing a chaotic mess of broken furniture, moldy boxes, and tangled cords. The smell hit first: old wood, mildew, something sour that lingered in the air. Most bidders peered inside, wrinkled their noses, and stepped back. Layla leaned toward Naomi, eyes narrowed. "It looks awful." "It looks like everything we've ever owned," Naomi said softly. "But sometimes the worst mess hides the best secrets." The bidding started slowly, 200, then 250, then a bored laugh from one of the men in a cowboy hat. "You ladies planning to buy that trash heap?" he asked, grinning. "Might find yourselves a new wardrobe in there if you like the smell of mold." Layla ignored him. Naomi didn't. Her pulse throbbed in her throat, but she lifted her hand. 400, she said firmly. The crowd turned, a few chuckled. The auctioneer looked amused but pleased. 400 to the young lady in the back. Going once, twice. He slammed his gavel. "Sold." The sound echoed through the yard like a shot. Layla exhaled shakily. "You just spent everything." "I know," Naomi said, "so let's hope it wasn't a mistake." By noon, the heat had become unbearable. The air shimmered above the asphalt and sweat trickled down their backs as they sorted through the storage unit. Layla wore gloves and a determined expression, pulling out cracked picture frames, torn books, and boxes that disintegrated the moment she touched them. "Who keeps this kind of junk?" she muttered. "Look at this. Old Christmas lights, broken dishes, a chair missing 2 legs." Naomi didn't answer. She was kneeling near the back, brushing dust off a stack of wooden crates. Something about the far wall caught her attention. The metal didn't look quite right. The panel on the right corner was slightly uneven, just enough for a sliver of light to peek through. "Layla," she said slowly, "come here." Layla dropped the box she was holding and crouched beside her. "What is it?" Naomi pressed her fingers along the edge of the wall. It shifted, barely, but enough to tell her it wasn't bolted like the others. She pushed harder. The panel creaked and swung inward, revealing a narrow compartment hidden within the wall. Inside, resting in the shadows, was a small leather pouch. Layla's breath caught. "You've got to be kidding me." Naomi reached in carefully, her heart hammering in her chest. The pouch was heavier than it looked, the leather soft but thick, the seams hand-stitched and worn smooth by time. She untied the cord that sealed it and slowly spilled the contents onto a piece of old cloth. 12 silver coins rolled out, each one tarnished, each one heavy and ancient-looking. Layla stared. No way. Naomi picked one up, running her thumb over the faded engravings. The surface bore Spanish text and a royal coat of arms so finely detailed it couldn't possibly be a toy or replica. "These look real?" she whispered. "Real?" Layla laughed incredulously. "Naomi, they look like they belong in a museum." Her laughter broke the silence, echoing off the metal walls. For the first time in months, it wasn't the sound of exhaustion or defeat, it was wonder. But Naomi's instincts didn't let her relax. She examined the pouch again, then looked toward the corner of the compartment. Something else was there, a folded piece of parchment, wrapped in oiled cloth. She reached for it, careful not to tear the fragile paper. "What is that?" Layla asked, leaning closer. Naomi unwrapped it, revealing a map drawn in brown ink, the edges torn and stained. Mountain ranges, rivers, and markings in old Spanish script filled the page. "It's Arizona," Naomi murmured. This looks like the Superstition Mountains." Layla's eyes widened. "You mean, like the lost treasure stories? The ones Dad used to talk about?" Naomi nodded slowly. "Looks like it." The two sisters sat there for a long moment, the sound of the desert wind whistling through the storage unit's open door. Dust swirled in the sunlight, dancing above their discovery like a silent celebration. Layla broke the silence first. "You think it's real?" Naomi glanced at the coins, the map, and then at her sister. "I think someone went to a lot of trouble to hide it." Layla smiled, a grin that held exhaustion, disbelief, and a spark of something long buried. "So, what do we do now?" Naomi took a deep breath, folding the map with trembling fingers. "We find out why." As they stepped out into the blinding Arizona sunlight, the pouch clutched tightly between them, neither noticed the figure sitting in a pickup truck across the street, engine off, windows tinted. The man inside lowered his binoculars and made a note in a small leather-bound book. Then he smiled. "Looks like someone finally found Harold Morrison's secret," he said under his breath. And as Naomi and Layla drove away, unaware of the eyes watching them, the first ripple of danger stirred in the desert heat. The coins felt heavier at home. Naomi set the leather pouch on their kitchen table, a scarred rectangle of second-hand laminate that wobbled if you pressed the wrong corner. Afternoon light spilled through thin curtains, turning the dust in the air into drifting constellations. The studio smelled faintly of coffee and bleach. Layla had cleaned in a burst of nervous energy while Naomi drove. They laid the 12 coins on a folded towel. Each one was a small moon, smudged with centuries. The reliefs were astonishingly crisp where the tarnish spared them. A crowned shield, a cross quartered by castles and lions, the curling serif of old Spanish letters. Layla held one close to her ear and flicked it with a fingernail. The ring was clear, not tinny. "Silver," she whispered, eyes bright. "Real." Naomi forced herself to breathe evenly. "Real doesn't mean valuable. It means we need to know which real." 1700-something, Layla said, squinting. "Is that 1748? Could be." Naomi reached for the folded parchment they had handled like something living. The oiled cloth had left a protective sheen that smelled faintly of smoke and tallow. When they opened the map, the room seemed to lean toward it. contours of mountains, an inked line threading a route through valleys and dry creek beds. Labels in formal script: Sierra del Diablo, a name someone later had crossed out and replaced with a cleaner hand. Superstition. A small drawing of a bird outspread, inked atop a cliff spur. An eagle, exaggerated, its beak hooked like a scythe. Layla touched the drawing with the tip of a pen cap. The Devil's Eagle. Tell me that's not a story waiting to happen. It's a landmark, Naomi said, though her voice had softened. A story is what you tell after you don't die. They photographed everything, front and back, in full light and with shadows pulled across details to raise the ink. Naomi's caution was a habit that had once saved them from a predatory payday loan. Now it built a small wall between them and trouble. Layla didn't mind. She'd learned that Naomi's walls had doors, and she always left them unlocked for Layla to run through first. They needed context. They needed names. An old index card had fallen out of a water-stained shoebox in the storage unit earlier, barely noticed in the rush. Morrison. Harold typed in crisp, faded letters with a P.O. box and a phone number that returned a hollow tone when dialed. Naomi set the card beside the coins as if the man himself might step out of the print. "Okay," she said, "we do this right. No pawn shops, no whispers. Library first." The Phoenix Public Library had a corner that time forgot, rows of microfilm drawers and machines that hummed softly like bees in winter. The attendant, a woman with gentle hands and a tired smile, guided them to the Spanish colonial stacks and left them with a warning about the climate controls. Hours passed. They turned cranks, scrolled frames, blinked at inverted ghost letters, and slowly learned the careful arrogance of 18th century handwriting. Naomi took notes in a neat slanted script. 1751, convoy lost between mines and mission. Father Francisco Garces, reports of hostile raids. Emergency caches ordered. Layla translated aloud in fits and starts, her high school Spanish unsteady but stubborn. "Listen to this," Layla murmured, tapping the glass. "If attacked, bury the plata in market ground and use agreed signs. And, wait, Eagle Rock beyond the second arroyo." Naomi glanced up sharply. "Eagle." They found references to temporary stations, to parages where mule trains rested beneath cottonwoods, to carved symbols on boulders pointing men who could not read the stars. Again and again, the reports mentioned the same corridor of land, the place the map seemed to thread. An old road in a younger world. On a different reel, Naomi stopped. "There," she said. An inventory written in fussy lines, stamped with a crumbling seal, 46 Barra de Plata, sealed for transport. Beside it, a marginal note in a different hand. Delivered never. The air conditioner cycled on with a sigh. Layla exhaled a laugh she hadn't noticed holding. If there was ever a sign— "We don't chase signs," Naomi said, but she took a photograph of the frame anyway. They left near closing, eyes gritty, fingers ink-smudged. Outside, dusk had softened the city into a watercolor, pink sky brushing blue buildings. The desert heat finally loosened its grip. In the parking lot, Layla leaned against their car and looked at the map photo on her phone. "So, now we find Morrison," Naomi said. "If he's alive." He wasn't. East Valley Storage had a brittle office that smelled like stale coffee and laminated rules. The manager, Janet, according to her nameplate, recognized them from the auction and greeted them with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. They asked about Unit 47 as if they'd found photographs they wanted to return, an old excuse that fit too easily into people's ideas of good girls. Harold was a regular, Janet said, scanning a computer. Paid on time, quiet, kept mostly papers. He passed last October. Daughter came by, didn't want the unit, Said she couldn't keep paying for boxes of old documents. Layla and Naomi shared a glance. Not guilt, something like responsibility rubbing against opportunity. "Do you have a contact?" Naomi asked. Janet hesitated, then scribbled a name and an address on a post-it. Patricia Wells, Scottsdale. "Thank you," Layla said, meaning it. In their world, help often came with a price tag. The unpriced kind felt rare. Patricia opened her front door the way a person opens the past, carefully. She was mid-40s, brown hair pulled back, wearing a t-shirt dusted with flour. The kitchen behind her smelled like cinnamon and panic. When Naomi explained, 1,000 calculations moved across Patricia's face, then settled into the expression of a daughter who still talked to her father in the present tense. "You bought Dad's unit," she said, and invited them in. The living room bore the pleasant clutter of children and ordinary miracles. Crayon drawings magneted to a fridge, soccer cleats on a doormat. It was a gentle place to break the surface of deeper water. Naomi showed the photographs of the coins, watched Patricia's eyes widen without the glaze of greed, and relaxed a fraction. "Dad never told us he found anything," Patricia said. Her voice turned a little. "We thought he was out there making friends with saguaros." "His name was on a card in the unit," Naomi said. "We thought maybe he left notes." Patricia looked toward a bookcase where Arizona histories leaned like old men. She pulled down a leather-bound journal, its edges frayed soft by hands that had turned it often. If anyone left notes, it was Harold. He kept track of receipts for shoelaces. Naomi accepted the journal with a care that had nothing to do with paper. Inside, neat lines of small, meticulous handwriting marched across cream pages. Dates, coordinates, sketches of ridgelines. Layla ran a finger beside entries as if tracing a river. There were references to Spanish reports, citations of archival numbers that matched the library reels, diagrams of boulders with arrows pointing not north, but home. Then, 6 months before his death, a page different from the rest. The handwriting wavered, excited. Conclusive evidence. Eagle formation as per Father G. Carvings consistent with military signage. The valley exists. Evidence of temporary fortification, water source, and buried cache. Detector reading strong. Do not publicize. Proceed with caution. Legal groundwork first. Beneath it, a phrase in Spanish. La plata duerme bajo el valle que el tiempo olvido. The silver sleeps beneath the valley time forgot. Layla's throat worked. He found it. "Or he found the path to it," Naomi said softly. She paged forward and stopped again. Paper-clipped to a later entry was a copy of a mineral rights deed, notarized with a legal description of land that read like a riddle. Township, range, section. Inside the margin, Harold had scribbled, "Necessary protection. Consult Museum Council re-disposition and stewardship." Patricia looked from one sister to the other, and something like pride broke through her grief. "He really did it, didn't he? I thought—" She shook her head. "I thought he just needed to feel useful again after Mom." "He was more than useful," Naomi said. "He was right." A timer beeped in the kitchen. Patricia laughed unexpectedly. "Cinnamon rolls. Do you want—" "Another time," Naomi said, though her smile reached her eyes. "If we find what he found, we'll bring you everything he wanted you to see." Patricia touched the journal. "Keep it with you. I trust you." She said it simply, and it felt heavier than the coins. They planned like women who had learned to survive by outthinking storms. At the kitchen table, they spread topographical maps beside Harold's drawings and opened a dozen tabs on Naomi's battered laptop. Articles on the Superstition Mountains, legal guides on archaeological permits, The price of handheld satellite communicators on discount. Layla configured a shared folder, backed up photographs, scanned every page of Harold's journal. Naomi, who could take apart a budget and put it back together with fewer screws, listed gear they owned and gear they could borrow. They argued in low voices about risk, about telling their mother, about whether to consult a museum before they even tested ground. They decided, not easily, to wait on institutions until they had proof the site existed beyond a dead man's pen. Institutions were slow. Warnings had a way of outrunning help. At midnight, while Layla brewed another pot of coffee, Naomi opened the email client to send a draft, to themselves, to a trusted friend, to an encrypted address she used for job applications when discrimination hid behind friendly tones. She attached scans, coordinates, notes. She saved, but did not send. Not yet. "Tomorrow we go back to the storage unit," Layla said, lowering her voice out of habit. "There was more in that compartment. You saw the crease in the dust." Naomi nodded. "We pick up anything that connects Harold to the map. Then we sleep. Then we call—" A soft sound interrupted her. Paper slid against linoleum. She looked down. An envelope had been pushed under their front door so smoothly the curtain beside it barely stirred. Layla crossed the room in 3 strides and scooped it up. No stamp, no return address, just their names printed in block letters, Naomi and Layla. Her hands were steady until she opened it. Inside, a single sheet. Words cut from magazines and glued with tidy precision. "Stop looking for what isn't yours." The desert already buried those who tried. The room changed temperature without the thermostat moving. Naomi felt a cold climb her arms like water in a narrow canyon. Layla's jaw set. "Cute," she said, but her eyes had sharpened, not with fear, yet, but with the inventory of door locks and window latches. Naomi held the paper by its edges. No fingerprints obvious, no scent but glue and ink. "How would anyone know?" she murmured. "We didn't tell anyone but Patricia. We kept our voices down at the library." "Storage auctions aren't silent," Layla said, "and Harold wasn't the only one reading history. People follow people with machines like they follow storms." They checked the door. The deadbolt was engaged. The chain hung intact. The hallway beyond the peephole was an infinite tunnel of beige carpet and numbered doors. No footsteps, no voices. Just the far-off sound of an elevator closing and opening and closing like a breath. Naomi photographed the note, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and tucked it into a folder with the same care she'd used on the map. Fear had a taste she knew well. It made everything metallic. She sat, forcing her hands flat on the table until her pulse found the space between beats again. "What now?" Layla asked. "Now," Naomi said, "we do what Harold did. We prepare, we document, we move quietly, and we don't scare ourselves out of being brave." Layla's smile was quick and fierce. "That's my sister." They made a list of practical steps because practical steps were ladders out of spirals. Change the curtains to blackout. Buy dowels for the sliding window tracks. Pick up a cheap motion sensor from the hardware store. Ask Mrs. Alvarez next door if she'd mind being the person they texted twice a day for the next week. Layla set an alarm for sunrise. Naomi scheduled an email to send automatically at noon the following day. Coordinates, scans, names, if she didn't manually stop it. At 2 a.m, the city finally cooled. The traffic thinned to single cars tracing their private routes across a map no one else could see. Layla fell asleep on the couch, arm flung over her eyes, journal open on her chest. Naomi washed 2 coffee cups and stared at their tiny window's reflection, a double that looked like 2 women peering through from the other side. She turned off the kitchen light, left the lamp on low, and moved toward the bed. Something shifted beyond the curtain, so faint she would have missed it if the note hadn't tuned her nerves to a higher frequency. Not the thunk of a pipe or the hum of the building. A shadow passing, stopping, then flattening itself into stillness as if breath could be heard through the drywall. Naomi didn't make a sound. She crossed the floor on bare feet, every board memorized. She reached for the baseball bat they kept by the dresser for ordinary dangers like ordinary women. She stood to the side of the window where the wall would hold her if the glass shattered. The shadow remained. The curtain moved a fraction. No breeze, the AC long off. Slowly, she lifted a corner of fabric with the bat's end. The night outside was a watercolor, too, smeared neon and ink. The small backyard of their low-rise complex sat quiet. Trash bins, a line of bicycles, the pale rectangles of other windows. No one stood in view. But somewhere, just out of sight, a step, the soft snap of gravel returning to place after a foot withdrew. Naomi let the curtain fall. She counted to 10, then to another 10, teaching her body not to sprint without a plan. From the couch, Layla's voice came low, awake without moving. "You saw it too." "Yes." Layla sat up, the journal sliding to her lap. The sisters looked at each other in the half-light, mirrors with different histories written into their mouths. "Tomorrow," Layla said, "we go back to the unit. We take everything Harold left that can't be argued with. And then we go find the Devil's Eagle." Naomi nodded. "Tomorrow." She set the bat gently against the wall and reached for the lamp. The room became a shadow among shadows, except for the thin band of streetlight leaking through the edge of the curtain, like a map's torn edge, pointing toward a place where a line continued in the dark. The desert was already awake when Naomi and Layla's old Jeep rolled out of Phoenix before dawn. The headlights cut through the lavender haze of morning, catching on dust, mesquite, and the thin silver of highway snaking east. Naomi drove with both hands tight on the wheel. Layla sat beside her, the map spread across her lap. Harold Morrison's journal open like a prayer book. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the apartment. The note still sat sealed in a plastic bag inside Naomi's backpack. It wasn't fear that silenced them. It was focus. Something inside them had shifted. By the time the first edge of the sun broke the horizon, the Superstition Mountains appeared, massive, jagged, almost unreal, peaks like the bones of giants. The sisters parked near an old trailhead, long abandoned by tourists, the kind of place only coyotes and dreamers still crossed. Layla shouldered her pack and turned to Naomi. "You sure about this?" "No," Naomi said, adjusting the strap of her water flask. "But I'm sure I'd hate not knowing more." They locked the Jeep, checked their GPS, and started walking. The desert was brutal in its beauty. Every stone seemed to whisper history. Every shadow hinted at eyes watching from somewhere beyond the rock. The air shimmered with heat, though it wasn't even 10 yet. The map led them through narrow passes, across dry creek beds, toward a ridge that Harold had drawn again and again in his notes. The Devil's Eagle. By noon, they reached a plateau that overlooked a valley swallowed in silence. Layla shaded her eyes. "That ridge, doesn't it look like—" Naomi followed her gaze. The cliff ahead curved into a perfect outspread shape, rock wings reaching toward the sky. An eagle, exactly as drawn on the map. Her throat tightened. "It's real." Layla grinned. "Then so is the rest." They hiked down into the valley, the air growing stiller, heavier. A dry riverbed cut through the floor like a scar. Naomi scanned the rocks as they walked. There were markings. Spanish crosses carved into stone, faint but deliberate, arrows pointing toward a cluster of mesquite trees near the base of the cliff. She ran her hand across one carving. 17th century tools, she murmured. These grooves are hand-cut. Layla crouched beside her. You sound like Dad when you do that. Naomi smiled faintly. Maybe he's proud right now. They followed the carvings deeper into the canyon until the trail narrowed into a shadowed gap between boulders. There, half buried in sand, they found what Harold's notes had called El Portal. It wasn't a portal in any mystical sense, just a small cave mouth hidden behind thorn brush and loose stone. But as Naomi knelt and brushed away the debris, a gust of air escaped from within, cool and ancient, smelling faintly of rust and earth. Layla clicked on her flashlight. Guess we're going in. The tunnel was narrow at first, forcing them to move sideways. The walls glimmered with flecks of mica that caught their lights like stars. After a dozen yards, it widened into a small chamber supported by rough wooden beams darkened with age. Naomi's heart pounded. In the center of the chamber sat a half-collapsed crate. Around it, shards of pottery, rusted nails, fragments of leather. She crouched and brushed away sand until metal gleamed beneath. "Layla," she whispered, "help me." Together, they pried away the rotted planks. Beneath them lay bars of dull silver, stacked and sealed with wax stamps, long melted into indistinct shapes. There were crosses, chalices, and rosary beads tangled among the metal. Everything was caked in centuries of dust. Layla stared, frozen. "We found it. Naomi, wait." Naomi's voice cut through the silence. She tilted her head. Somewhere outside, faint but distinct echoes of movement. Tires on gravel, voices. Layla extinguished her light instantly. The two sisters crouched low, breathing shallowly. Naomi's pulse drummed in her ears. She slid closer to the entrance and peered through a crack in the rock. 4 men stood near the mesquite trees where their footprints ended. Dust covered their boots, guns hung from their belts. One of them, tall with a pale scar cutting across his cheek, held a satellite locator. The device beeped faintly as he scanned the area. Layla's whisper barely reached Naomi's ear. "Who are they?" Naomi didn't answer, but she recognized one of them, the man from the auction, the one who'd mocked them. His name tag had read Castellano Salvage and Survey. He hadn't been just another bidder. He'd been waiting. The scarred man gestured toward the cave entrance. "They came this way," he said. His accent was rough, his tone confident. "Tracks are fresh." Naomi's stomach twisted. She mouthed silently, "We have to move." They retreated deeper into the tunnel, careful not to make a sound. Layla slung the map case over her shoulder and clutched Harold's journal to her chest. The passage split ahead into 2 corridors, one narrow and steep, the other flat but darker. Naomi took the narrow one. Behind them a voice echoed faintly. Closer now. "They found something," Castellanos barked. "Check the cave." Boots scraped rock. Flashlights flared. Naomi grabbed Layla's arm and pulled her forward. The tunnel turned sharply, then opened into another chamber. A small cavern with a low ceiling and a stone ledge that dipped toward a crevice. "This way," Layla hissed, pointing to a narrow fissure in the wall barely wide enough to crawl through. Naomi hesitated only a second before shoving her pack ahead and crawling in. The rock scraped her elbows and tore her sleeve, but she kept going. Behind them, light spilled into the chamber. "Over here!" someone shouted. A shot rang out, deafening in the confined space. Dust rained from the ceiling. "Go!" Naomi gasped. "Keep going!" They crawled until the passage widened enough for them to stand again. The air grew cooler. Faint daylight filtered through cracks ahead. The tunnel emerged behind a cluster of rocks overlooking the far side of the valley. They stumbled into the open, lungs burning. Layla turned, clutching her bleeding hand. "They're behind us." Naomi yanked out her phone, pressed the SOS feature on her satellite tracker, the one she'd bought cheap online and nearly left at home. A red light blinked once, then twice. Somewhere in the distance, a low rumble answered, the unmistakable sound of a helicopter. The men shouted from the cave mouth, their voices growing fainter beneath the roar. Layla grabbed Naomi's hand as the wind from the chopper whipped dust and sand into the air. A voice boomed through the speakers. "Stay where you are. Don't move." Relief crashed through Naomi so suddenly it felt like falling. She raised her hands high as the rescue team descended. For a moment, all she could do was look back, toward the valley, the cliff that looked like an eagle, and the shadows of the men retreating below. Layla leaned against her, trembling and smiling at once. "We made it." Naomi nodded, her throat tight. "Yeah, but this isn't over." As the helicopter lifted them above the desert, she saw it clearly for the first time, the full shape of the valley below, its ridges forming wings spread wide. The eagle wasn't carved by man. It was nature itself, guarding its silver heart for centuries, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. And now that someone had. 18 months later, the desert had a new story to tell. It began with a case of glass in a quiet hall and a brass plaque no bigger than a hand. It began with 2 names, etched with the patient certainty museums reserve for the things they believe will outlast them: Naomi Carter and Layla Carter. On opening night, the Arizona History Museum breathed like a living thing. Crowd murmurs rising and falling, shoes whispering over polished floors, the soft thrum of air conditioning battling September heat that clung to the city long past reason. Under suspended lights, a long display cut through the room like a riverbed. Inside lay the proof of everything they had risked. 12 colonial coins, the first door into the past, the oiled cloth map fragment, the thread, a rosary, a chalice, a ledger page browned by time, 3 silver bars banded with stamped royal devices, and, centered like a heartbeat, a small Franciscan medallion with a name that had written itself across their research: Padre Francisco Garces. The exhibit title arched overhead in white letters: Lost Treasures of Spanish Arizona, the Morrison Collection. Beneath it, an explanation the curators had argued over for weeks, but finally got right. A story about contingency, stewardship, and the line between treasure hunting and history. Naomi stood a step back from the glass, watching strangers lean close to the artifacts as if proximity might transmit centuries like warmth. She felt the now familiar tug between pride and protectiveness, the urge to slide between the display and the public and say, "Be gentle." These things survived storms you cannot imagine. Beside her, Layla tilted her head so the medallion's engraving sharpened in the light. "Still gives me chills," Layla said quietly. "Good," Naomi answered. "We should keep a few." They didn't need the reminder of what the room cost. The weeks after the helicopter had been a mosaic of jurisdictions and proofs. Sheriff's deputies cordoned the valley with webbing and signs. Federal agents photographed every inch as if documentation could bend time into a straight line. Archaeologists descended with brushes and calipers, respectful and relentless. Harold Morrison's journal became a star witness, its dates and marginalia stitching the field notes into a narrative the law understood. The notarized mineral rights deed, half forgotten in a sleeve of Harold's papers, did what paper sometimes can. It moved the universe an inch. It did not grant them the earth under their feet. It did not place a lock on the past. It gave them standing, a word that meant, "You belong in this conversation." The conversation took months. University council, local prosecutors, the State Historical Society, 2 federal agencies, and a museum board tried on positions like codes, who owned what, who protected whom, where the line ran between artifact and asset. Meanwhile, Castellanos and 2 of his men were picked up crossing into New Mexico with a trunk full of looted pottery from another site. The case against them was not cinematic. It was slow, thorough, and built on the unglamorous strength of records. Radio chatter captured on the helicopter's mic, GPS pings from the sisters' satellite unit, photographs of slashed tires and a stripped engine block, a recorded threat shouted in a cave where stone remembered echoes longer than men remember themselves. Patricia Wells sat with the sisters through hearings and dull depositions, her fingers worrying the edge of a paper cup, the journal on her lap like a relic, and an anchor at once. Once, outside a courtroom where cold tile magnified the quiet, she said, "Dad used to talk to me about stewardship, about how finding a thing doesn't mean you own it. It means you owe it your best." She glanced towards the double doors where lawyers were staging their next arguments. "I think he'd say you did your best." In the end, the agreement achieved the rarest outcome. It satisfied no one entirely, and so it might have been fair. The Morrison collection, named at Patricia's insistence, would be acquired and conserved by the Arizona Historical Society in partnership with federal land managers and the university. The Hidden Valley would be designated an archaeological site under protection. Ongoing excavation would proceed under professional supervision, with the sisters appointed community consultants and Harold acknowledged as primary discoverer. In return for their role in discovery, preservation, and documentation, and the transfer of rights derivatives that no one had fully expected to matter, Naomi and Layla received a structured financial settlement totaling $2.3 million over 5 years, pegged to exhibition revenue and conservation milestones. It was money with rules. It was more than enough. They paid their mother's medical debts in one morning. Carmen cried without embarrassment at the kitchen table of her old house, a sunbeam warming the vinyl in front of her. "I told your father he would leave you something," she said, the kind of joke people tell to open a second door for emotion to walk through. "I was just wrong about what?" They repaired the roof that had leaked for 3 monsoons. They replaced the wheezing AC that had made summer a siege. They filled the pill organizer with a month's medicines without choosing which bottle to skip. When Carmen moved to a smaller, brighter place near Encanto Park with a neighbor she liked, the first thing she hung was a photo of the twins at age 10, dirt on their knees, smiles like declarations. Naomi enrolled at the university and sat in her first graduate seminar feeling both too old and too alive. She spent afternoons in a windowless lab like a chapel, learning to read soil the way you read diaries, teasing stories from isotopes and toolware. She volunteered at the museum on weekends, guiding school groups past the case and answering the question kids most loved to ask. "Did you keep any?" She learned to say the thing that was truer than any easy narrative. We kept the parts that matter. The notes, the route, the people who walked it. Layla discovered she liked the business side of memory. She and Naomi filed articles of incorporation for a small firm with a name that made donors smile and bureaucrats take their calls. Carter Heritage Foundation. They set up 2 programs, a legal clinic for hobbyists who wanted to do the right thing before a shovel hit ground, and a micro-grant for first-generation students in archaeology and cultural resource management. The clinic started in a borrowed conference room with a donated pot of coffee and a volunteer attorney who'd retired from state service with a drawer full of forms and an allergy to sloppiness. The grant started smaller. 3 students the first year, each with a letter from Layla that began, You belong in rooms that haven't been built yet." They returned to the valley often, now with permits pinned to their packs and radios clipped to their belts. The place had changed and not changed. The tape and stands and tarps gave it the temporary air of a field hospital, but morning still rose into it like a secret told again. The cliff still threw an eagle's shadow across the floor. Under that shadow, interns knelt with brushes and sieves, shoulders pinking under long sleeves, careful as prayer. Sometimes Naomi would stand at the edge and feel the strangeness of passing from trespasser to steward, from chased to welcomed, from hungry to funded. She learned to translate the feeling into rules of thumb for the students. The difference between finders and keepers is paperwork and patience, and the humility to let the ground set the pace. Castellanos, faced with a tangle of charges, illegal excavation on protected land, conspiracy, assault, accepted a plea and a term substantial enough to echo. He wrote a letter to the court blaming 1,000 things that weren't mirrors. Naomi read it once and put it away. The only part that remained was the single line where he conceded that he had been warned by the 2 sisters with the satellite beacon that help was already on its way. It was not the apology the valley deserved. It was a record. Reporters came and went. Headlines rose and fell, their heat brief compared to the desert's ancient fever. Some stories wanted the easy arc, from poverty to plenty, from almost victims to almost celebrities. The sisters tried gently to bend the narratives back to the center. Twice, a journalist followed Layla to the foundation office and stayed long enough to watch her on the phone with a rancher who had found a scatter of planeware on a hill. "No, sir," she said, patient and firm. "I can't promise your name on a plaque. What I can promise is you'll sleep better." Twice, another watched Naomi spend a morning labeling boxes of reconstructed sherds with careful hand, smiling to herself at a match she'd made between patterns of grit and the weight of a thought 250 years old. They shared credit as a practice, not a courtesy. Every presentation began with a slide of Harold Morrison's journal. Every tour mentioned Patricia's decision to trust strangers with the best part of her father and the part that terrified her most. Every grant report listed the field crew in alphabetical order: drillers, drivers, doctoral students, the volunteer who never forgot water. On the evening of the opening, the museum offered canapes and white wine in plastic that pretended to be glass. Speakers did their work. The director with his cadence, the state rep with her salute to heritage economies, the tribal liaison with a reminder that all maps are partial, all histories contested, all stewardship shared. When it was time for Naomi and Layla to speak, they kept it brief. Naomi stepped to the podium first. She thanked the people who had turned emergency into process. She thanked Harold by name and Patricia by name and her mother by name, because names anchor truth to people rather than institutions. She said, "We stand here because a retired man loved this place enough to sit with it for years. We stand here because a field team did the patient work of turning wonder into evidence. We stand here because we were frightened and careful at the same time." She did not say brave. The room didn't need the word. Layla stepped up next, notes in her pocket untouched. "When we were kids," she said, "our dad used to tell us the desert keeps secrets the way a good neighbor keeps spare keys. It holds them for when you're locked out. But you don't get the key by pounding on the door. You get it by knocking and saying, 'Please.'" Somewhere in the room, a grandmother nodded and a student wrote the line down. When the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned to families with bedtime leeway, the sisters made one last round. At the case, a trio of middle schoolers pressed their palms to the glass until a docent, smiling, asked them to step back. One boy, small and serious, leaned in to read the plaque again. He glanced up at Naomi and Layla with the frankness kids allow themselves. "How did you know you could do it?" he asked. Naomi thought of 20 answers: luck, caution, Harold, paperwork, a helicopter that arrived in time, and chose the one she could live with. "We didn't," she said. "We knew we could try long enough that quitting would feel like lying." The boy nodded as if he'd expected as much, and the docent herded them gently toward the gift shop where a rack of reproduced maps printed on paper that smelled faintly of marketing waited to be taken home and pinned above desks. Outside, night had settled like a blanket pulled to a chin. The museum steps held the day's last warmth. Naomi and Layla sat side by side. The city stretched below them in a quilt of low lights. A bus sighed at a stop. Somewhere, a horn made a sound that meant hurry, and someone else answered with a sound that meant wait. "You know the strangest part?" Layla said after a while. I wake up, and the first thing I feel isn't relief. It's responsibility, like the story handed us a corner, and now we're obligated to keep pulling." Naomi smiled. "We're good with corners." They sat in the quiet until a security guard cleared his throat politely. Before they rose, the sisters looked back through the glass doors, down the hall, to the lit case that held the coins and the map and the medallion. Footsteps moved in front of it. Strangers passing, pausing, peering, continuing, like the record of a river over stone. Inside the hall, a small placard waited for people who leaned close enough. Discovered by Naomi and Layla Carter, who proved that history belongs to those brave enough to uncover it. Layla traced the air in front of the words with a fingertip, as if signing something binding. Then she bent toward Naomi, and in a voice meant for two, she said, "We weren't just looking for silver. We were digging for our own worth." Naomi looked at her sister, and for a moment, the first morning at the storage facility telescoped forward. The envelope of money, the heat that made the air wobble, the door slamming up on a room full of ruin and a chance nobody else wanted. She nodded once, the way you nod to a map when it matches the land beneath your feet. "Looks like we found it," she said. They rose together and walked into the night, leaving the museum to keep watch until morning. They went looking for answers and found a legacy that changed everything. What would you have done in their place? Tell us in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story to support our channel.